Hello, you guys. Good morning. Today, I'll explain to you the points that are found in the two articles I sent you earlier. First one is written by Pamela Habi, which is titled Elementary Logic in the Ancient World, and the other one by Tim Crane, which goes with this title Philosophy, Logic, Science, History. This is going to be a short lecture, just an introduction or a synthesis of the two articles with a particular or a few modifications. And I'd also like to tuck in some important points that I got from my review of other several sources. But don't worry because it is just going to be an introduction, a short lecture. So we begin by stating the very nature, or let's just say we begin with this characterization of the nature of philosophy, which is according to Simon Critchley, popular British philosopher of contemporary time. Philosophy begins in disappointment. Well, it is actually a new notion because what is commonly known is that philosophy is, well, a combination of two Greek words, philos and sophia. The former means in English love, and the latter means wisdom. So traditionally, philosophy is defined as love of wisdom. But in Critchley, we find a peculiar, rather a peculiar characterization of this notion as, a byproduct of an existential mood or an individual disposition. So Critchley says that doing this theoretical work of philosophizing or inquiry actually is a manifestation that something or that someone has observed some rather frustrating things, maybe not only interesting things that go around him. And I think this is, well, true if we, excuse me, check it against, that's my dog burping. Check it against the backdrop of, let's just say, Buddhism or Hinduism, or yeah, Buddhism. Maybe Buddhism is the perfect example here. Um, we talked about if we examine the life of who will eventually become um, the first Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, we'll find that um, Siddhartha Gautama was frustrated. He became so disappointed with what he learned or what he saw with the events that started to unfold around him. If you hear this really strange noise of, you know panting, this is my dog. He is sitting beside me and he is panting, breathing hard. I don't know what happened, but he's just fine. But going back, Gautama was a bit disappointed because he did not expect that reality was that hard. He was enclosed in a, well, very well accommodated and privileged life. He had his servants, and he lived in luxury. When he went outside, when he sneaked, um, and found there that the social environment that surrounded him was actually full of pathology and sickness, then and there he began to think about the seriousness of life. So it's not about life being, a bunch of problematic situations, or life being not an easy one to live. So from there, he withdrawn from the or he withdrew from the comfortable life that he lived, and he began to live in isolation, and he eventually found this movement. Well, because Buddhism started first as a movement, just as Christianity also did the same. Anyway, so that is a case, I think, that proves that, well, thinking and doing philosophy is really an offshoot to some disappointing turns in life. And if we check this proof against some Western events, then we will have a lot more of convincing evidences, evidences to prove that this statement is, well, is maybe not necessarily true at all times, but makes sense. Yeah. But then here, philosophy is not a thing. It's not an entity according to Critchley. It's an activity which is conducted by finite thinking creatures like us, and this activity must form part of life of a culture. Philosophy is a living activity of critical reflection in a specific context. It depends on where the questions are asked. To raise questions of a general form or a universal form. Now, I think the key word here is, well, there are several keywords here, but the sentence in the middle always stands out. The sentence, by the way, goes: philosophy is a living activity of critical reflection in a specific context. And the last sentence here also has a particular weight to consider. It says it's a kind of activity that raises questions of a general form or a universal form. In other words, doing philosophy um, is engaging in an activity that questions the very foundation of things, of why things um, appear the way they appear, how things appear the way they appear. Now, if we look at if we look at it that way, we might find it to some extent related to, scientific discovery, but maybe also because perhaps there is a relationship really between science and philosophy, and the relationship may not be um, maybe um, to some extent classic. Um, but also because we have to think that the sciences, the natural sciences, as we know them today, did actually have a late emergence. Well, the human beings of the earlier generation, the generation that um, predated to earlier than 2000 years ago, did already employ some scientific tools or methods to understanding life and dealing with it. But the modern science, as a natural science, did start to flourish only at the annals of, let's just say, 13th, 14th century. And so the birth of industrial revolution, scientific revolution occurred around that century. Anyway, the thing is that philosophy is the living activity, according to Critchley, of critical reflection in a specific context. And particular questions are asked in relation to or within a particular context. However, this particular relation or questions do possess a universal applicability. Like, for example, let's talk about morals or morality or ethics. Let's take the case of Robin Hood as our example. Now, Robin Hood did steal, well, as the story goes, from the rich, and he gives what he steals, he gives the loots to the poor villagers. Now, we highlight the phenomenon of stealing here as the point for analysis, and we say that, and we try to evaluate it according to the standards of our society or to the moral standards of our society. Where legally stealing is always wrong, but sometimes morally it bears an equivocal characteristic. So now we begin to characterize or problematize stealing or theft in relation to young Robin Hood's case. But then again, according to the philosopher Immanuel Kant, the only test to this, the only criterion or standard to understanding whether these forms of human activities are acceptable or not is the categorical imperative, which is otherwise known as unconditional moral demand. So Kant was saying that you only need to think about or start to hypothesize about whether you can accept everyone to be doing the same. So if you can accept that everyone steals and commit theft, and that's okay for you, then you can make stealing as a maxim of your action. So Kant says that um, we only act in such a way that the maxims of our action can become at the same time, or yeah, can become at the same time a universal law. But if we don't want everyone to steal, we don't, if we can't allow theft, either for practical reason or for theoretical purpose, then make non-stealing as your maxim. So you don't steal, right? That's how easy it is for Immanuel Kant. And the same thing also goes with when you cheat during the exam. If you want everyone to cheat, then cheat. Universalize, if you want to universalize cheating, then you cheat. But if you don't want to be doing the same, then don't cheat. That's how easy it is in his formulation. So the point here is that there are questions that are embedded in a particular context, but these questions really do maintain or is has an emblematic of a universal form. Now let's go to Crane. According to Crane, philosophy is peculiar activity, but he did not provide a definition of philosophy either as a term or as a discipline. What he did was um, he would follow Sellars, Wilfred Sellars eventually, and we'll go to that part of the presentation. He said that in trying to understand complex phenomena, very little is achieved by giving definition. The point here is that to Crane, um, trying to encapsulate philosophy as a discipline into few words, into few characterizations, or into a definition would be a delimiting activity, delimiting task. Because again, it said very little is very achieved by giving definition. This reminds me here below, I highlighted it here, of the two philosophers of phenomenology, namely Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger. Edmund Husserl and Heidegger um, are popular. Well, popular is an um, is not wait popular. The term popular is actually underrated term, right? Because Heidegger and Husserl are colossal um, thinkers in the 20th century. Well, the philosophy of phenomenology actually says that, or posits, is a science of consciousness. It says that our consciousness is not monopolar. Our consciousness is maintaining this bipolar relationship with an object, so that our consciousness is always a consciousness of something. And there is now a gap between our consciousness and the spatial object. So that when you look around you, you'll notice that there are objects that exist, there are books, tables, many others that surround you, and you are capable of actually accommodating them on your mind, on your consciousness, but you won't be able to place them inside your consciousness in their strict dimensional form. So Heidegger and or Husserl in particular said that you can abstract from what you see and bring the form and bring out the form of that object and um, and put it accommodate that form, the abstracted form now on your mind, on your thinking. So Husserl said that that is the reason why we don't define things. We only see things, we only perceive them the way they appear to us. We don't start with a definition of things or prejudices of things, but we just accept things in the manner that they appear to us. That's phenomenology. We see the things the way they appear to us. Heidegger also said the same thing in his groundbreaking work Being and Time. Heidegger there argued that in the same way that we understand human existence, we don't define human life because with reality is too broad. It's too broad to be defined or to define, and definition distorts reality. We just don't know how much damage we cause on the human person's life or on other person's life once we start defining that person. Or the same thing if we apply it on ourselves, we don't realize how much damaging it is to our lives and to us once we start delimiting our capabilities or potentials as a human being. So instead of defining ourselves or any other human being, we start to just accept them in a phenomenological way in the manner that they appear to us. But then again, there are other problematics to this philosophy which I won't discuss today for the lack of time. So Crane adopted Wilfred Sellar's characterization, not definition, of the aim of philosophy. So instead of talking about the nature of philosophy, they talk about the aim of philosophy. To Wilfred Sellars, the aim of philosophy is to understand how things, in the broadest possible sense of the term things, hang together. This is actually important, though short statement, because it provides us the insight of its opposite, that is, the condition of things that are out of joint, so that when you are in the engineering field, you always have, or maybe in architecture, you always have to make sure that things connect, right? You always have to make sure that things are not out of joint, that they are situated on a particular hinge, that they hinge on a particular foundation, and that this hinge, this connection is not at least awkward to see or awkward to observe, so that things will only work properly if they are not out of joint, if they hang together. And that is the nature of philosophy. It understands, or not nature, one of the aim of the philosophy is to understand how things hang together. And I like the way um, I like how post-structuralism or structuralism as philosophical um, discipline works, because it talks about structures that we don't see and yet are existing. Like, for example, the structure of laws of economy and laws of political community, the laws of nature that we don't see, right? These are structures that um, sustain things and the order of things. So that if we look at how the world operates, it operates actually not in a devastating and random manner. It follows a particular structure. You may call it logical structure of economy or logical structure of science and of development of technology, of society. Call it whatever you want. It remains to me, and at least to some philosophers, a structured kind of space, or a structured kind of existence. There is always the structure that sometimes are oppressive, sometimes are enabling. The we don't see, we don't know, but we keep on following. And it's difficult for us to really undo the structures, because according to the words of the philosopher Max Weber, these structures are like constellations, constellations that are very much, very much away, ahead of us, so that they were already there prior to our existence. Excuse me. And they were not only there, but they were also efficiently operating. There are philosophers who are anti-structures, and they are called revolutionary philosophers. They go against structures because they think that these structures suppress freedom, suppress existence, and are by their nature oppressive. We can talk about Karl Marx and the psychoanalysis of and the psychoanalyst Freud, and of course we have Nietzsche and many other philosophers who did launch their assault on structures in general. For example, we talk about Nietzsche, who was very critical to Christianity, the structure of Christianity. According to him, Christian structures or life delimits, because it sustains a particular kind of mentality, which is called the herd mentality, and it's a kind of subservient mentality that, according to Nietzsche, um, enables and promotes in a very unconscious way cultural interest. But there's a lot more to talk about Nietzsche, which we can't um, tackle today because of time. All right, so we have here um, comparison of two perspectives. One is by Critchley and the other one is by Sellars. So Critchley says philosophy is the living activity of critical reflection in a specific context, and it helps us understand how things hang together. Um, Here is an example of a problem here that we need to understand via philosophical reflection, that is, ecological crisis and the ideology of recycling. Now, I was reading recently this book by Slavoj Zizek. The book is, by the way, titled "Welcome to the Desert of the Real," and it talks about the ideology of that is operative in society. Now, one example there of Slavoj Zizek is the ecological crisis. He says that ecological crisis seems to have received a very wrong solution, because what is being promoted as a solution, the popular solution to ecological crisis is that we recycle our stuffs, right? But then again, according to Slavoj Zizek, this is all wrong. Why? Because in the first place, ecological crisis is structural by nature, and recycling is a subjectivating activity. And he says we don't solve structural problem by subjectivizing or subjectivating solutions. Structural problems need structural solutions or response, because recycle no matter how you recycle and try to solve it individually, as long as the the continuing burning of coal and the emission of greenhouse gases in a large scale continue to exist, your individual response will eventually end futile. So that is how to look at things, as how they hang together. To Slavoj Zizek, this is how I get it. It's to think that individual solution is enough to curtail structural problem is to think out of joint. Thinking that way is actually a kind of thinking that doesn't see how things really hang together. So philosophy enables us to think in a collective and holistic manner. It enables us to understand how things really work. All right. And Crane says that, yeah, maybe just um, an overview of the article here. Because of this, philosophy um, works in a particular breadth of its own. It has the characteristic of generality. Remember my example of Immanuel Kant earlier? Um, Philosophy is broad because it asks about the general features of reality. It when, for example, we talk about how to solve the environment by recycling, it probably it doesn't stay there. Rather, it problematizes recycling as a solution. So it doesn't only talk about an aspect of reality, but the very foundation of reality, as in Martin Heidegger, who questions the meaning of being. What does it mean to exist? What does it mean to be? To live my own life, to be authentic? And then Heidegger says in Being and Time that living one's life is actually that living an authentic life is a life lived in dissociation with and from the crowd. The crowd is the source of inauthenticity according to Heidegger. So there is this kind of withdrawal from the crowd, right? The crowd is the untruth according to the philosopher Kierkegaard. And it seemed that Heidegger picked that up, or pick was like he picked that he pick picking up on that notion. So the other problematic here is between one and the many, right? Talks about whether there is only one reality or there are many forms of reality. And the thing is that according to Aristotle, there are several forms of being or reality, while for Parmenides there is only one reality. I mean, if you think about reality, there is no non-reality. Reality exists and it exists as one. Therefore, the changes that we see every day, all these motions, transitions, are actually illusion. There is one reality, one being, and the rest are illusion, according to Parmenides. But Aristotle said that's too general, too hasty a point because um, Parmenides failed to account, the difference between act and potency. Anyway, the other examples here is or are on truth and the tension between universal and the particular, of wrong and right. Now, let me say something about this tension between universal and particular. It is a tension between the individual and the society, the individual and the structures surround him, or it is a tension that we experience between ourselves and our culture, or our being a citizen and the state that oversees our existence. So the thing is, according to Hegel, this is a problematic tension, but will eventually have to lead to a constructive hyposynthesis. Now, we always ask about we ask about the relationship between us citizens and the state. We seem to think that the state always can do almost anything to us. But then again, we also want to um, what's this? We also would want to exercise our particularity, our freedom, and we have this kind of moral repulsion toward um, manipulation or toward controlling behaviors by other people. So there is this tension, and philosopher Hegel talks about it. And of course, we have here Immanuel Kant, who says that it's always moral for us to not instrumentalize other people. Now, one formulation of the categorical imperative is or states that we treat always the human being, whether in our person or in the person of the other, always as ends and not as means to our ends. So, this is a reminder to all of us that it's wrong to manipulate people, right? Because we have to respect their freedom, their autonomy as rational beings like us. We don't want others to manipulate us or treat us in a degrading way, and we should also do the same. That's, I think, the point there, but there's still a lot more to Immanuel Kant than what was being said. And a long list of stuff like this go on. Um, uh, when you do philosophy, there's a lot of discussions going on today, even until today, especially today at the height of and the middle of this pandemic, right? Okay, and then Sellers treats philosophy as a form of understanding. In other words, according to Sellars, philosophy is a cognitive activity. Talks about the truth, about whether we really exist, about whether reality really exists, and it's it's a kind of activity that doesn't settle with the object of our epistemic or truth um, activity or search for knowledge. It's kind of an activity that doesn't settle with the output of what is to be known or the outcome or the object of knowledge, but it problematizes its very own formal and material object. That is, it problematizes the condition of knowing itself. It asks whether we can really know and what are the conditions for knowledge. It doesn't ask right away what can we know or what can be known. It asks what is knowledge, what are the conditions for knowing. And so we get here the intriguing question by John Locke: is knowledge a priori? Is it really innate? Or do we get that kind of knowledge from our experience or from the outside? So David Hume asks whether knowledge depends on experience and what are the conditions for knowing. There's a debate between the rationalist and the empiricist. The rationalists claim that knowledge is a priori innate, that according to Plato, we already have all those forms on our mind, only we need experience or our conversation with people for us to remember them. So knowledge is sought not through experience but through remembering. And he calls that anamnesis. We remember, that's why we know. And well, romantically speaking, it is really important that we remember, right? Um, we remember the genocide of the 20th century, and we know that it's wrong. So some things come through or appear to us through remembering. Um, while John Locke and David Hume argued to the contrary that no, because all of these details in our on our mind did have an empirical emergence. This excuse me, these details did originate um, from or with an empirical existing moment. That is why we have to experience them first. So experience is the very condition for knowing, according to David Hume. And because we have different experiences, and we must have also different understanding of things, right? But Immanuel Kant says, can we really ever know? Then Kant says, it's not enough that we settle with the acceptance of experience as the origin of knowledge. It is also important that we question what are the internal constitutions of an experience and what is in experience that we really know. So Kant said that we don't know from experience. We know because we don't know from experience alone. We know because there are innate categories of reason, like for example, quantity, quality, time, distance, numbers, mood, and whatever. And we use these categories of reason to understand the objects of our experience. So that Kant says it's not the object of experience that give us knowledge about them. It is the category of our reasons, the categories of thought that enable us to understand what we are experiencing of. So that the conditions, excuse me, of knowledge is a synthesis of the innate categories of thought and the objects of our experience. According to Immanuel Kant, the object of our experience is abstract. They appear to us in pure contingency. They appear to us as mere objects, and until we use the categories of our reason that we start now to understand and know them. All right, and so goes the skeptical challenge of the modern period. Okay, so these are basically the important things that we learn from Crane. This is my synthesis of his section on philosophy there in the article. But Sellars said that in doing philosophy, what is more interesting are not the answers to those questions, but the questions themselves. So we keep on asking, we don't settle with an answer. And sometimes we get the wrong answer because we get the wrong question. So it's the question that is more important than the answers themselves. Um, isn't it nice to think that maybe because we don't get the right answer because our question is not the right question to begin with? And that is how important or questioning is in the evolution of our lives. So I have here some movie suggestion, or yeah, perhaps um, the Night Train to Lisbon is a movie that tells you how it ends with a totally open question. Don't know what happens next, but it's a nice movie, and I think there are only a few movies today that uh, e- enable us to encounter this kind of message that life doesn't end in a particular scene. It always still flows on, that it continues later even. So the question is what will happen next, right? And the movie Night Train to Lisbon fairly or best capture that kind of experience. And of course Plato's Theaetetus, and Plato is always questioning. He was always questioning. He never settled for an answer. And yeah. So we go with the conclusion here. It says philosophy therefore becomes to some extent associated with science. It's a science because it it is about it's an attempt to understand things generally, and it uses rational demonstration. So philosophy and logos that study essential science. Two, they are two related concepts, if not identical. Okay, how about Habi? Well, Pamela Habi went all the way back to Aristotle in praising the field of logic. And she said that logic is foundational. Um, Logic is a science or branch of philosophy that is concerned with arguments. Logic is the science and art of correct thinking, of correct arguing, and it is one of the major disciplines in philosophy. And this discipline, according to Habe, is traceable um, to Aristotle, or perhaps earlier, right? Because the Chinese were also doing the early Chinese did also have their logic, which is called Naya Naya. And the Hindus, the Buddhists, also did have their own logic of samsara, if I'm not mistaken. So, logic is the practice of logic is actually inherent in all civilizations. Perhaps because Tim Crane was right. Um, we all want structures in life. That is why we all want to be logical in our approach toward reality. And all students need to study logic. That's according to Habi. It's part of the education of a university student and it's foundational. All right. Um, but then again, Habi rather, encountered some problems in the article. He said that, okay, how about the distinction between advanced logic and elementary logic? And he said that we should be able to distinguish elementary between elementary and more advanced logic because not all young men is interested. Even in the time of Plato, not all young men is interested in studying complicated logical theorems. According to him, in the ancient time, um, many were more interested in the study of rhetorics or rhetorical education, which is you know sounds rhetorics is like how I call this the art of argumentation. But rhetorical arguments may be not logical arguments. So there are flaws in rhetorics that only logical studies can identify. For example, I don't know if you're familiar with the um, a series there, a TV series on ABS-CBN, but ABS-CBN is now closed. But there is a TV series on ABS-CBN before. There was a series before that best captures this kind of controversy between logic and rhetorics, and it's the Going Bully Lit segment. You know, there in the on the episode there was a portrayal of two groups of individuals in an episode before. Uh, one group of individual is a group of Amazonas, and they are the women warriors, right? The hunters in the forest of Brazil, maybe Mexico, I don't know. Yeah. And the other one is a group of hunters. So one hunter asked the other, "Why are we carrying? Why do we carry arms?" And then his fellow answered or replied to him in saying, "Because we have to defend ourselves from the Amazonas." And then the other first person retorted, "Then, but why do we have to why do we have to defend ourselves from them?" And then the other one again um, responded saying, "Because we're carrying guns, we're carrying arms." And then the questioning goes on and on. It beats around the bush, and so the camera flips now to the other side, to the other group, and then one Amazon asks, "Why are we carrying spears?" And then her fellow Amazona says, "Yeah, because this self-defense is against in case the hunters find us, right?" And then the other one questions back, "Well, why would they shoot us?" And then because we're carrying spears, and the conversation goes on like that, and went on and on the same format. So it's the same when you ask your teacher, when you ask somebody, why are you absent yesterday, and then that somebody respond to you saying, because I wasn't present. It's pretty obvious. So that's actually kind of artistic way of responding or formulating questions, but for argument. But those are logically flawed arguments. So rhetorical questions are not free of logical inconsistencies. So in rhetorics, you learn to argue rather than learn the basic um, foundations of argument. Okay, yeah. So to trace this long history of logic, Hobby went all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. To her, Plato engage in a very dynamic life. He engaged in, excuse me, dialectical bouts. He was always in the marketplace, like he was always arguing almost every day. And he pitched proposition and defended that proposition or statement, argument by all means. And we can see that, for example, in Theaetetus. In Theaetetus, Plato, by way of Socrates, asked about the nature of knowledge, of the nature of knowing or truth. And one answer among many answers of Theaetetus was that truth is experience, or knowledge is experience. Knowledge is experience. So you know what you experience. So Socrates was disgusted by this answer because to him it's a simple tone, like it's a simplistic answer. Socrates said that if that's the case, if it is the case that knowledge is experience, then you can know and not know at the same time. Because if you experience with your sense of sight, with your sight, you see something, then you know something. But when you don't see anything, you don't know anything. So when you, for example, you close your your left eye, then you cannot see with your left eye, and therefore you cannot know using your left eye. You cannot know with one eye. But you at the same time open your other eye, then you know by the other eye. So when you are halfly, when one eye is closed or shut, the other open, you find yourself in a contradicting situation. That is, that by virtue of your sense of sight, you know and not know at the same time. And according to Socrates, well, that is problematic. That was a tricky argument. To me, it sounds like a rhetorical argument, but it's how Plato put it. Plato never settled for an answer. And also, one answer is a glass of cold water. Like for example, when take take a glass of cold water as our example, and imagine a glass of water, cold water, and place it on the table. Now, when you drink it, if you are from an air-conditioned room, you find that this glass of water is actually cold, but not very cold, right? But if it's drunk by somebody who is like who just returns home from a day in the field in a hot condition, then that person might find this glass of water extremely cold and extremely refreshing. In other words, the glass of water is both refreshing and not so refreshing at the same time, right? And according to Socrates, that is a contradiction. And that is why he said we cannot trust our experience because experience, our experiences may lead us to contradictory forms of knowledge or of knowing. But then again, the point here is that Plato pitched a proposition and defended it to the end by all means. However, the problem with Plato is that he developed no logic of its own. Okay, and but with Aristotle, we can talk about a lot of things. And so the study now goes to Aristotle and the long tradition that followed him. So these are this is Diogenes Laertius, one pedigree of Aristotle. But basically, Javi's presentation in the PDF is more informative and historical, and we don't have a lot of things to discuss here in the presentation. But we'll do what she did was a tracing of how Aristotle's logic survived time and the challenges of time and of history. So first is Diogenes Laertius. Can read that some detail about him. But here is an important thing here because the article talks about moods and mode, right? So this is an example of an argument that um, that concerns the term argument and moods and mode. So we have here an argument which, for example, says Lito is a Sillimanian, but all Sillimanians are smart. Therefore, Lito is smart. This is an argument. It has two premises here. Lito is a Sillimanian. All Sillimanians are smart. Therefore, Lito is smart. And a conclusion. Now, this is a mode of argument. All premises here are A premises, which means universal affirmative premises. But you'll come to know about it later. All right. So this is the presentation here. Very short presentation of the nature or the form of argument and its modes. And then we have several more details like according to um, Aristotle's works survived through Laertius, who was a Greek philosopher, founder of Cynicism, and work write the art of dialectics, which is his annotation of Aristotle's work as a posteriori and organon, and and he was in the industry of producing introductions and handbooks of logic in an Aristotelian way, and he was copying manuscripts, and his work became important, so important in the 370 by 370s, by 370 AD. That's why Aristotle's work circulated. All right, and then we have here several people like Lucius Apellius Madurensis. These are medieval, sorry, ancient, medieval, late ancient, early medieval thinkers who worked on the logic of Aristotle. So he was a no ordinary writer because he was Platonist philosopher and rhetorician. And yeah, so several details about these people here. And we have Galen, who was a physician and a surgeon and a philosopher. So the question was, so Galen wrote an introduction to logic, and he held the materials, he held on to Aristotle's logic, and he standardized the version of the categorical syllogism derived from Aristotle. So the question is, why was Galen deep into Aristotle when he was by profession a doctor, a physician? Then the answer was Galen had high reputation. His works were widely read, according to Pamela Habi. Yeah, so that's how it worked. And then we have Porphyry and Cicero, right? The poet, um, statesman, lawyer, scholar, and academic skeptic, and a few other detail about. Cicero. Okay, so what is being handed down to us in the long tradition that survived uh, is syllogistic logic. Excuse me. And a kind of a mediate inference composed of two propositions and a conclusion, two or more propositions that are premises and a conclusion. And this can be evaluated by virtue of its formal correctness of an argument. So, um, remember the syllogistic logic we had earlier, the one that says Lito is Silimanian and Silimanians are smart, therefore Lito is smart. That's an example of a syllogistic logic. It has two premises. It can also sometimes have more than two premises. Sometimes it only has two. It has only one premise and a conclusion, but that doesn't matter. It remains syllogistic. Okay. And the formal correctness, it's whether the argument is valid or invalid. No argument is true or false. Only propositions or statements are true or false. But arguments have to be either valid or invalid. Now, I return to the moods because this is the moods is always mentioned in the text in the PDF. Uh, the idea of mood or moods was established in the medieval period and is now the structure of Aristotelian logic. Remember the AAA structure? That's moods, or that's a mood. There are several other structures or mood forms like AEO, III, or OOO, but you'll know more about that later. But the idea here is a mood is an actual arrangement of propositions or schemata of arguments, while the mode is a character of a proposition as necessary, possibility, or possible, or yeah. So example of a syllogistic mode is this, like Lito is a Silimanian, all Silimanians are smart, therefore Lito is smart. And that's for the formal notation is A is B, B is C, therefore A is C. So if you look at letter 2, letter B is repeated here because that's the middle term in the syllogistic um, form, and C is a conclusion, it is another concept, another category. So A represents Lito, B, Silimanian, and C of class of smart people or smart C. Therefore, Lito is a smart person, right? That's syllogism. While modal logic is when you say pigs fly. Yeah, pigs fly, but only in a world where pigs do fly, pigs can fly. Or pigs fly. So it's true that pigs fly. In a world where pigs do fly, pigs fly is true proposition. But in our world where pigs don't fly, then pigs fly is a necessary for false proposition. This is the difference between moods and mode, and I think I hope you were able to get the very briefly the, co- the relationship. So that's basically the point of logic. Okay, Pamela Habi is saying that Aristotle's logic is concerned with syllogistic form of argumentation, an argumentation that is introduced by a premise or two and a conclusion. So there's only one conclusion in every syllogistic argument. Okay, so the limitation of Aristotle's logic, because it is part one of our syllabus, is symbolic logic. According to contemporary logic, when you say Lito is smart and Lito is, excuse me, Silimanian, therefore Silimanians are smart, you argue in a syllogistic way, but there are some forms of argument that they cannot follow that particular pattern, or that syllogism cannot work, and that is when you need symbolic propositional logic or representation. So, for example, this you have an argument which says the sky is blue, the sky is not blue. Therefore, Paris is a capital of France. You don't find this in Aristotle. Perhaps Aristotle will say that it's a very bad argument, but there are arguments that are just following this kind of form. So you can't anymore apply the formal notation which says A is B, B is C, because the conclusion is totally different, right? So we need a new form of symbolic or logical rules, and that is where symbolic logic comes in. So the limitation of Aristotle's logic is actually the birth of symbolic logic. So say instead of saying S is B, say it's the case that that's the case that sky is blue, and instead of say S is not B, then you say sky is not blue or not S. It's not the case that sky is blue, right? Therefore, P. Supposedly there's a P here. Therefore, P is capital of France. But if you try to use Aristotle's logic here, you say S is B, S is not B, therefore P is F. No, that's going to be really very wrong, right? I mean, it's not gonna make sense at all because nothing's gonna, uh, it's not gonna work. The terms don't connect, right? So an example of symbolic logic is this, like we have here several distinct propositions that are lined up. One first proposition says it is not the case that Al Qaeda is a humanitarian organization. You cannot formally notate that using Aristotle's symbolic logic. And then Diane Reeves sings jazz, and Christina Aguilera sings pop. And then either people get serious about conversation or energy prices will skyrocket. If nations spurn international law, then future wars are guaranteed. The Broncos will win if and only if. We can't translate this using Aristotle's syllogism. That is why we need symbolic logic, which is modern form of or contemporary logic, to help us understand um, better and set the argument for validity formally. So, guys, there is a thing. Maybe just a synthesis or a summary of points. The the logic that survived through long history, the logical study that was presented and well presented by Aristotle, well elaborated by his pedigrees, proteges, eventually encountered a limitation. I'm not saying it's a low kind of logic. What I'm saying is that it cannot work in propositional ordinary language like this. You say sky is blue, that's propositional, that's ordinary, right? This is a limitation of Aristotle, and that is why we need to transition from excuse me, Aristotelian logic to symbolic propositional logic, and that is well set in the syllabus and also elaborated in the and is structured in the textbook written by Patrick Harley, and that is how we work, what we do in the semester. And I hope that makes sense. I hope I made sense in my discussion, because that is all for Hobby and Crane, and short introduction to the distinction between symbolic logic and syllogistic logic. All right, that's all for the discussion. And um, if you have questions, you tell me later, okay? After probably of the recording or after you see or watch this presentation. But I'd like to give you an assignment, okay? You work on these assignments, submit the assignment on Thursday, this Thursday, that is this week. I'd like you to work on the following exercises in Harley's Intro to Logic. These are the exercises, chapters, or exercise 1.1, 1.2. On exercise 1.1, we have part 1, numbers 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, and so on. And part 2, and all of part 3, all of part 4, all of part 5. Okay? Just follow the format in the text. But by the way, there is on you'll know how to answer this if you refer to the answer sheet at the end of the textbook, there are answer keys there. You just follow their format and then submit the assignment in PDF and be ready for oral interpolation over your work. So you submit, you turn to me you turn in your papers, your assignment, and then I'll question you as we resume our class by Thursday. I will open box there, a suggestion on a submission box, and I'll leave it open until 7 a.m. of Thursday this week. All right. If you have questions, then you can ask me privately on Soul. And I hope you got the points and that it made sense. And I think that's all for our class. Thank you for yeah watching.